You know, another drug that affects it is cigarettes, quite frankly, because you may be taking a psychiatric medication, and it can be greatly affected if you smoke. So sometimes what we used to find is that a person would be in a hospital that did not allow smoking, and they get a person stabilized with certain medication. They're discharged, they start smoking again, and that medication is no longer effective. So even such things as that can be important to know.
Is it hereditary, bipolar disease?
There's parts of it. Again, this is one of the 5 illnesses that was found that have some genetic links. We are far cry from knowing all the elements of this. But if you talk with someone who's bipolar illness, they talk about how this emerged in their life. There's components of this that's underlying that help set it off. That's why I use the example of diabetes before. A person has to watch their diet and be very careful to have it under control. But that still means, however, there's some biological components which put you at risk for that and actually can set that off.
We'll go to Scott next. Oak Park, Illinois, Democratic caller. Hi, Scott.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
This is my first time ever calling C-SPAN. I listen all the time.
Welcome, Scott.
I'm a little nervous, but anyway. Good morning, Representative Murphy.
Morning.
I'm calling because this obviously is an issue that concerns me very dearly. I've been bipolar diagnosed since 2001. I've had my ups and downs over the years, but fortunately for me, due to medication and being the fact that I was able to get off alcohol and drugs, in fact, I just had 11 years sober in February, I've been pretty stable, but lately I've been going through some things, and here in the state of Illinois, especially with our Medicaid laws, they're now telling us that, because I go to both group therapy and individual therapy, and they used to consider those 2 separate sessions. Well, now they're combining them all and Medicaid is saying we're only going to dictate so many sessions per year that you're allowed that we're cover, and so I've had to cut down drastically my therapy sessions, which has been a big help to me, and it's just upsetting me and so forth that that like what you kind of said earlier, that mental health is still kind of being put under the rug a little bit, and it's just because the therapy for me has really been a big help for me.
Well, that's, first of all, Scott, good job on the 11 years of sobriety. Good job for that. But also on what you're talking about, the issues of the treatments have been effective, the medication has been effective, the group therapy and individual therapy has been effective. That's good. That's the kind of thing that I want America to know. That's the kind of thing I want members of Congress to know, and that's part of the reason why we're doing these forums today. This is not going to be your traditional hearing where everybody sits up on the dais and asks questions and they're given 5 minutes and they answer yield time. This is going to be a conversation with parents and with providers who can tell the real stories of these kind of problems and help members know that we are very effective in some areas and ineffective in others, but it only counts if people have access to it. And what oftentimes happens in federal and state dollars, they begin to look at, well, let's cut this budget down, and then we're going to save money. But what happens when we see, for example, when hospitals have closed, those numbers, we actually see some of the rates of crime go up, violent crime among people who have mental illness, and then go to jail. So we see those jail rates climb. We see police throwing their hands up and says, we don't know what to do with this person. This person can't even control themselves. What are we going to do? And it costs more.
Well, this is Shorty on Twitter who says, if they are dangerous, committed a crime, and do not care where they are, I am just as happy to have them in prison, not waiting.
Well, if they committed a crime, yes, I understand that. But what happens is many times the police will get a call that say John Doe, Mary Smith, whatever, is raving and acting dangerous or threatening people. But the police may take them to the hospital, and then they have to go through this, jump through the hoops to say they have to in front of a judge, or physicians have to declare them that they are incompetent and at risk of danger. And if a judge does not have those findings supported, then you may find that person is released again. And sometimes it's a matter the person's been on a medication, stopped taking medication. Sometimes you see they've taken a street drug, and that has set them off. We need to be dealing with all these things. But the cost in prison is a high cost. So if you're spending, what, $30,000, $40,000 a year to have someone in prison, you can, or more, $50,000, $100,000, it would cost us a lot less to treat that person, and that's the key here.
One last phone call. Mike in Welling, Oklahoma, independent. Mike, we have about a minute with the congressman. Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the relationship between SSRIs and semi-automatic handguns. We've had semi-automatic handguns in public schools since 1911, but it's only been since the 1990s that we've had school shootings and SSRIs. Do you see a relationship?
No. I mean, the idea that somehow medication causes violence is not true.
SSRIs. acronym for?
It's a type of medication.
Okay, great.
Serotonin reuptake block. I'll get back to that.
It's fine, but it's
early
medication.
In the morning. It's a medication. So when he's referring to medication cause, that's simply not true. There have been crimes and violent crimes committed by mentally ill people for centuries. It's not caused by medication.
The hearing this morning, 10:15, we're going to cover it here on C-SPAN, so go to cspan.org for more details. You're going to hear from families, from parents who have these children. I am Ryan Lanza's mom.
Yeah.
That went viral.
Yes.
Many people saw that. Hearing testimony this morning?
Yes. The mother who wrote
From
that
the
column,
mother.
she's going to be testifying remotely from her home. We'll have that done video. It's very moving to hear her story. She's talking about she has a son like Adam Lanza and the difficulties.
Adam Lanza, sorry.
The person, how they struggle with the whole home there.
Tim Murphy, thank you very much for talking to our viewers. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
Up next, we're going to turn our attention to the economy and talk with Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of the Financial Services Committee. And then later, Bloomberg Government's Bob Levinson joins us to talk about his recent analysis of which congressional districts, will be hit hardest by those Pentagon cuts. But first, a news update from C-SPAN Radio.
It's 8:31 a.m. Eastern Time. Well, U.S. home prices jumped in January, a sign the housing market is gaining momentum as it nears the spring selling season. CoreLogic, a real estate data provider, says home prices rose 9.7% in January from a year earlier. That's up from an 8.3% increase in December, and the biggest annual gain since April of 2006. Prices rose in all states except Delaware and Illinois. Meanwhile, the National Association of Realtors says sales of previously owned homes ticked up in January after rising to their highest level in 5 years in 2012. At the same time, inventories of homes for sale fell to a 13-year low. Congress is in session today. House Republicans have introduced their short-term federal spending bill aimed at keeping the government operating through September of this year. The plan, also known as a continuing resolution, or CR, will be taken up by the House Rules Committee today and will be voted on by the full House later in the week. You can hear this meeting live on C-SPAN Radio at 3 p.m. Eastern Time today. And an update on the election of a new pope. The Vatican is now waiting for 5 more cardinals to reach Rome before setting the date for the conclave to elect the pope. The Vatican spokesman, the Reverend Federico Lombardi, says another handful of cardinals had arrived last night, bringing the number of voting-age cardinals up to 110 of the 115 expected to take part. Some of the latest headlines on C-SPAN Radio.
One of the things that I actually don't mention in the book, but always grabbed me, was a report in a paragraph in the Hope Consulting report of one of their focus group, where they interviewed a guy. I think his name was Mark Kay. That sort of sticks with me sometime later after reading it. And I think Mark Kay actually encapsulated the donor mentality pretty well, where he said, "Look, I don't do research because I know that charities are going to do some good. Where I put my time in research is things like products, like around buying a microwave. I'll do research, but I don't need to do the research for charities." And I think that actually captures the prevailing ethic right now among donors. And part of my book is really, I would say, a plea to the donor community to rethink it. All charities are not alike. They're good ones, they're bad ones, there's a lot in the middle. We got to get money to the best in breed so that they survive and that the others don't.
With little accountability or measure of effectiveness, With Charity for All author Ken Stern looks at the world of nonprofits on Afterwards, Sunday night at 9, part of Book TV, this weekend on C-SPAN 2.
Washington Journal continues.
And we're back with Jim Himes, Democrat of Connecticut and member of the Financial Services Committee. The Republicans, House Republicans, are going to put a bill on the floor, possibly as early as Thursday, that will continue to fund the government until September, but it would keep sequester in place for the most part. How do you plan to vote?
Well, I haven't seen the bill yet, so I can't tell you how I plan to vote. What I can tell you is that if this is what it's billed as, which is just a mechanism to keep the government running beyond the 27th of this month, which is a pretty important thing to do, without a lot of political ideological baggage attached to it, I'm absolutely open to it. You know, you asked, the sequester is still in there. Yes, the sequester is still in there. The sequester, of course, always being something designed to create pain for members of Congress so that they get together and finally do the deal they need to do to put our country on a sustainable path. So hopefully this CR passes, this continuing resolution, this authority for the government to continue to operate after the end of this month passes without incident, without too much of a fight. Because on top of the sequester, we don't need a government shutdown fight.
Is the sequester going to have cause economic damage?
Of course it is. I mean, you know, that's not even a question. You know, depending on who you listen to, the number of jobs lost over a period of time range from 700,000 to 2 million. It's not a good thing economically. It's not a good thing for the Department of Defense or for anybody else who relies on, you know, schools that rely on federal government funding. So of course it's going to be economically detrimental, and what's unfortunate is A, that it happened, and B, that it's really not moving us in the direction we need to do to deal with the core of our fiscal problems in this country, which are long-term healthcare cost increases. You know, I have all these arguments about you know, where tax rates are, DOD spending, all of those are legitimate arguments, but the core issue this country needs to address, and not just this country, by the way, the federal government, state governments, municipal governments, you know, corporate healthcare plans, unless we get healthcare spending under control, everything else we're doing is a sideshow.
A news analysis piece in the LA Times yesterday by David Lauder said that the sequester is moving us toward that direction. Deficit target is hit because of the budget fights that have happened, the fiscal cliff deal that came part, the sequestration, that has provided the deficit target, the deficit lower.
Well, you know, the fact is, and this often doesn't get talked about much, the fact is that starting about 2 years ago, we have actually made meaningful progress towards getting our long-term fiscal balance set. That's a result of the Budget Control Act, which reduced the levels of spending. It's a result of the January deal, which found $600 billion over 10 years of new revenues by raising taxes on the very wealthiest Americans. So, yes, we have made progress. There's two problems. One, I don't agree with the math there. There is, in the long run, more yet to do. And that doesn't have to do with, you know, next year's or this year's budget. It has to do with the aging population, the increasing costs of health care, which I've been, you know, beating that drum this morning already, and what that does in the long run. So we do have more to do. And the other thing, of course, that's bad about the sequester is that you would never choose to cut that way if you were making good policy rather than creating a hammer over the head of the Congress. You know, across-the-board cuts is not the way to go. Lots of good programs are going to be badly damaged because of the sequester.
On the optics of this, here's the Washington Times editorial this morning. A Rasmussen poll released Monday shows that more voters think the cuts will have either a positive or no impact on their lives than think it will have a negative impact.
Well, we'll see. You know, this is what, of course, makes budget issues so hard. Look, at the end of the day, that poll will prove flat out wrong. It may be true that today, you know, people think it's a good thing, but if dealing with your budget were a happy thing, we would have done it before. The fact of the matter is that those things that get your budget into line make some people uncomfortable because you've got two levers, right? You can increase revenues, it's taxes, or you can cut programs. And everybody says cut, cut, cut. What they always mean is cut the other guy's stuff. And so, you know, as these cuts take effect, people are going to feel the pain.
You're willing to put entitlement reform on the table, changes to Medicare and Social Security. Are you willing to raise the eligibility age for Medicare?
No one should ever let anybody say that Medicare and Social Security need absolutely no change ever. And frankly, my party is sometimes guilty of leaving that impression. And that's a terrible thing to do because it has nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats or who gets blamed. Look, our population is getting older and health care costs are rising far faster than inflation. Those two facts mean that we will, in a fair and equitable way, if I have anything to say about it, in a fair and equitable way, reform those programs so that they are sustainable for the next 75 years. As it happens, raising the eligibility age of Medicare is actually not a particularly effective way to do that. Why is that? Medicare, of course, is a health insurance program. If you take 64 and 65 or 66-year-olds out of that program, what have you done? You've taken your healthiest population out of an insurance program, which is, these are people who pay in as a proportion of the people in Medicare more than they take out. So, I've just never been convinced that that's a particularly good idea. But nobody should ever say that no changes will happen to those programs. That's just not true.
First phone call here for you comes from James in Fairfield, Connecticut, independent caller. Hi, James.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Good morning.
Morning. Sorry, go ahead, James. Morning.
Good morning, Congressman Himes. I'm one of your constituents here in Fairfield. And my question is this. Is there a legislative agenda at the start of each session? And is there a possibility that we can shorten the session of Congress so that we can keep you folks there 6 days a week to get jobs done? Because it seems from the voters' point of view that Congress isn't in session enough to get things done. Members are shuttling back and forth to their districts, and if you were there for 6.5 days a week and don't come home, things would get done and compromise would be achieved.
Yeah, James, it's great to hear from you. Always nice to hear from the home district. I am not convinced. In fact, I don't think that the polarization and that the dysfunction of the Congress today is attributed to the fact that we're not around enough. We're around plenty. We're around doing things that are, not that substantially important to the future of the country, whether it's naming federal facilities or, dealing with smaller stuff. The issue is more about an unwillingness to compromise. And whether you're here 7 days a week or 4 days a week, that issue around compromise is not going to go away. And we don't have time to get into all the mechanics of that, but it has to do with money in politics and the fact that people who throw bombs and take extreme positions get all kinds of financial support. It frankly has to do with gerrymandering. It has to do with the anger roiling the American public right now. And it has an awful lot to do with, a tone that was set by Newt Gingrich many years ago. I was in high school or something, but the people who were around at the time said that Newt Gingrich said that the parties should not engage in compromise, that they should be basically in full-time war, and that therefore the moment you're done here in Washington, you should go back to your home state and campaign like mad. And by the way, I don't want to discount the point entirely. I've worked with a group called No Labels, which encourages the formation of friendships across the aisle. And that's really important. And James, you're right that if we had more opportunity to form those friendships, I think we'd have a smoother functioning Congress. But the unwillingness to compromise, I think at this point is a bigger problem.
Ken in San Francisco, Democratic caller. Early morning to you. Hi, Ken.
Yeah, hi. How are you doing? Thanks for taking my call. I've got a question here. Why are we ignoring single-payer health care? The Veterans Administration does a really good job of taking care of their people for a lot less money than the health care corporations. And also, the pharmaceutical corporations are just really sticking it to the American people big time.
Congressman?
Yeah, a very, very good question from Ken. It's not just, of course, the VA. Medicare is a single-payer system, and the administrative costs of Medicare, that's the, processing the claims and paying the people who do that, the administrative costs of Medicare are much, much lower than those costs are within a private health insurance company. Look, you don't need to pay your CEO of Medicare $20 million. You don't need to advertise. And so there is real merit on the part of those who point to lots of other countries and say a single-payer system is a way to go. So why did we not meaningfully explore that 4 years ago? The answer to that question is not that there's not merit there. It's that was just, plainly speaking, too much of a political lift at the time. The health insurance companies obviously would have a very, very different world were that to be the case, and they mobilized hard to prevent meaningful discussion of that, and so it never really got on the table, which, it's a shame we didn't have the opportunity to more robustly debate that idea.
Here's a tweet following up on what you said about Medicare and Social Security. Overwhelming majority of Americans want you to fix the deficit problem without substantial changes to Social Security and Medicare. Does it matter?
Well, yes, I know that, Americans are, and all of us, frankly, we all want to go to heaven, but none of us want to die, right? I mean, it's really scary to think that these programs, which are so popular and so important, to keeping seniors out of poverty, to making sure that seniors have access to health care, but they don't get changed in any adverse way. That, as I said before, that they be reformed in a fair and equitable way. So that means, what does fair and equitable mean? It means we're going to protect those seniors who have no other option.